guys, this is Jenny. I am back to share another video for my YouTube channel and blog. I am going to be using the W plus 9 stamps and dies for it's the Little Dreamers stamp set. And I'm going to use it to make a card, which is a little bit different from most of the videos that I make. I'm also going to use these two frame dies. One is it's a storybook die. I believe that's what it's called, from Pretty Pink Posh, and the other one is the Lawn Fawn die. It's a double stitch die, border die. So I've got this little pack of papers that I use for especially made for Copic markers. I believe it came in a large pack of Copic marker paper, and so I'm going to utilize that. I'm also going to use this piece of smooth hot press watercolor paper for the background, and watercolor a little piece of the background with it. I'm going to speed this up a good bit because there's a lot of this video, and I'm going to talk through a little bit of it, but this is me using this is my Winsor Cotman watercolor set to watercolor just a very neutral but sort of pastel colored palette on the back of this or on this watercolor paper. I wanted it to be very, very light, and I just used a little bit of pink and blue and yellow and dried it with my heat tool and made sure I dried it on the back so it stayed flat. Flicked some little paint splatters on it, and now I'm going to use the stamps from the die set that I chose and stamp them onto this Copic friendly paper with my Misty tool. I used them and stamped. I rotated the piece of paper 180 degrees and then stamped them again so I would have extras. I do that a lot of the times because it helps me if I need to test something out as far as colors, or if I mess up, or most of the time because I want to go ahead while I've got everything out coloring. I want to go ahead and color another set. I can put them in the back of the stamp set and have it ready to go to make a quick card next time. So I'm going to go ahead and show the marker coloring portion of this. I'm going to color the clouds first, and I'm going to zoom in here and show you those are the colors there on the left, and these are pretty small images, so there's not a whole lot of blending, and I wasn't really excited about this color that I did for the clouds. I wanted them to be a little bit lighter, but I liked it in the end because it gave a good contrast to the brown from the bears. I've used all of the other animals from this stamp set except for the bears, so I was excited about doing it, but I hadn't yet come up with a color palette for the bears. So I've colored those clouds. This is the star because that's what I plan to use with this one little bear hanging off of it. And you can see the colors there that I use for the markers. And I just use a lighter to medium, darker, and then come back through the whole color palette there. The final palette that I decided on for these bears was really much lighter than I had originally thought it would be. I started with E11 and E13 and E15, and really tried to keep it as light as possible. All of my images I used with the light source coming from the right, so they have shadows on the left side of their faces or bodies, and especially under the neck of these bears and places like that, especially the back side of the stitching. I used that as a guide to help me decide where the shadows would be too. you can see on the bottom side of that in a minute where I had tried a couple other different color palettes that were way too dark. And I really like this lighter color. I wanted the bear's faces to show up much more, so that's why I went with this. It's this one is E13, E15, and E25. I think I used E18 a little bit, maybe for some accent colors, but these are the main colors there. And I really struggled to keep it as light as possible. They're very small images, as you can see, and you just get a little bit carried away. They probably don't need as much blending as I went into them. And in fact, this little seated bear here gets way too dark for me with the colors I used, and so that was great to have an extra image stamped so that I could color it as well and potentially use it. And I believe I did use that one, even though it does have a little bit of a you'll see it's got a little bit of a spot over the ear, which I think I white out with some white gel pen. So you can see this one gets really dark, and I really wanted the lightness of their faces to show, so that's why I went back and used the other image. After I get done coloring all of the bears in the basic color that I've got there, and I color the little seated bear with the same colors using the blues from the clouds and then one darker blue there. I try to color in a little bit of their cheeks with some pink, like their ears and feet, but it doesn't really show up so much, so I do some white gel pen freckles on them. I do go back and add a little stippling to give them a little bit of texture, but it's hard to see because they really are very small. So, and you can see how much ink I have all over my hands. So after I get all of them colored and then touched up a little bit with a white gel pen, which does wonders, really, especially when you've got an image that you have a die cut, a die cut die for them, and they cut the white border around it. You want to make sure that it's a nice, clean, crisp border around it. So there's a couple that have some of my lines that I've gone over coloring, and then this one that had a little bit of I believe it was a little piece of the stamp that actually came off, or maybe it was just a little spot on the paper. And so I used my white gel pen to white that out, and you never can see the difference. And there's so much going on at the end with the card that you really wouldn't be able to tell. So that's the little bow I'm going to color for the bears, and I use the same, like I said, the same cloud colors, and then this darker blue just to give it a little bit of a deeper shade there in the sort of shadows of the bow. I'm going to color the cloud here under this last bear, and what I plan to do is have these three little bears be part of this 3 storybook die, and then have the left side be shaker with like star sequins and different other sequin colors, and the sentiment somewhere in between there. I hadn't quite figured that part out of it. So I'm pretty much done with the bears now. Here's my white gel pen. I'm going to just touch up some of these areas, and then I'm going to use the dies and some Scotch like nonstick tape to tape down my images while I cut them out with my Big Shot. And I'm just gonna keep talking through that part of it. Um, I really liked the more brown of those colors, but it got way too dark, and so I ended up with this more reddish brown. And I think it looked good in the end. I think I like the contrast and the sort of blending with the yellow. I mean, it made it a lot warmer, but it just got way too dark. I'll have to come up with a lighter palette that's a cooler brown. So after my watercolor background dried, I used this stitched rectangle die from Lawn Fawn to cut out the background piece of the watercolor paper. Now I'm going to use the storybook die to cut out the frame for my card base from another like heavy white cardstock. Now I've got the dies for each of the critters and pieces from the Little Dreamers collection. And I just constantly, every time I do some coloring, I use up as much of the piece of the Copic paper because it's precious, to go ahead and stamp and color as much as I can, and then I will go ahead and die cut them all, and I just have all of my stamp envelopes and dies with just loads of colored images in the background. Some of them, you know, were maybe ones that I didn't like as much, or maybe they're just extras, but they're always there in case I need to throw together a quick card. And so after I get done cutting all of those out, I use this fun foam I have that's pretty thin and the storybook die, and I cut out 3 layers of it. And like I said, it is fairly thin, so that was going to be what I built up to make the shaker part of the die instead of using too much dimensional adhesive, because the frame for this storybook die is fairly thin. So it made sense to go ahead and cut them all out of the same die, and then I could stack them up and layer them. I ended up only using, I think, 1 layer of the foam, but I cannot quite remember. I used this. I used some double stick tape on the frame piece, and then I used it to adhere my acetate to, and then I used the just some glue adhesive to glue the 2 pieces together. And there was a little bit of overflow from the liquid adhesive, which is one of the reasons I really don't like liquid adhesive, but it did dry clear, and more importantly, I had plenty of these images which kind of covered it up. So now I'm going to start to lay everything out all together. So I had planned to have this one little bear holding onto the star, and the one with the cloud off to the right, and the one at the bottom, the little bear that sits. So originally I had actually planned to stamp and heat emboss onto the acetate, but I ended up using one of the cuts that came out from the die cut there, that one square, and I heat embossed a just one of the flat silver colors, and I decide to go ahead and add a little bit of distress ink and color it so it wasn't too stark against that. I believe it was the cracked pistachio. Add one of the little foam pieces behind it to give it a little bit of dimension, and then put it on top of the frame. And then I'm going to go ahead and replace everything and start to adhere some of it down. This is a lot of fiddling with this card, which just shows you how much goes into something that just seems like a very small a small piece and a small card, and there's, there was a lot of thought and a lot of placement and a lot of reconfiguring in this card. So I get those all kind of placed where I want to, and then I'm going to start to pick out some of the sequins for the sequin portion, which is going to be that left portion of the die. Everything, the entire portion behind the storybook frame is covered in the acrylic or acetate, but I only used the sequins on that left side. So I'm going to add them to where the frame will turn out to be, instead of trying to flip things over, because that would be a mess. I used some silver star sequins and some clear sequins, some white glitter sequins, some little a couple little pequins. I tried to keep it pretty neutral, and then I add another layer of that double stick tape on the back of it, the back of the entire piece, which is the front layer, the acetate, the foam, and then onto the final base card piece. So these are the final little images, and they have been glued and adhered with dimensional adhesive onto the back. Here are the little stills and the final piece. I love the way it turned out. It was a lot of fiddling and a lot of trouble for a sweet little card, but I think it turned out great, and I really appreciate you stopping by to check it out. Make sure you click on the subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out some of the other videos that are shown here below. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.